In Cold War terms, a dogfighter was a fighter that routinely ended up inside visual range, where turning room, energy management, and pilot sight lines mattered as much as speed. Early jets entered that environment by necessity. Guns remained the reliable weapon, radar was limited or absent, and short endurance compressed engagements into brief, sharply defined encounters. The Gloucester Meteor F-8 represents the transitional edge of the category, an early jet fighter whose limited performance still led to genuine close-range employment as air forces learned what jet combat demanded. In Korea, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15 brought swept-wing performance into widespread service and made high-altitude maneuver fights a defining pattern of the era. Its principal opponent, the North American F-86 Sabre, was shaped around dayfighter combat, combining controllability with gun-based effectiveness in the visual arena. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17 followed as a refined maneuver fighter, extending the lineage toward better transonic handling and keeping the dogfight central even as technology advanced. By the late 1950s, many air forces still treated the dogfight as a likely outcome, and transonic dayfighters were shaped accordingly. Cockpits favored visibility, airframes were tuned for climb and turning performance, and guns remained central even as early short-range missiles began to appear at the margins of doctrine rather than at its core. The Hawker Hunter stood out as a sustained turn specialist built to stay in the fight and capitalize on handling rather than electronics. France's Dassault Mystère IV carried a light fighter philosophy into the transonic era, armed with a gun-centric profile that matched the expectations of close-range engagements. At sea, the Grumman F-11F Tiger pursued high agility in a compact naval day fighter, reflecting carrier operations where fights could compress quickly. The North American FJ-4 Fury extended that carrier-capable day fighter lineage, optimized for visual range combat in a demanding operating environment. On the opposing axis, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-19 introduced early supersonic performance while retaining credible WVR capability, bridging dayfighter assumptions into the next speed bracket. The 1960s spread of lightweight supersonic fighters reflected a point defense mindset. Get airborne quickly, meet the threat close to home, and resolve the encounter in minutes. Many carried only small radars or relied on ground control, and high thrust to weight encouraged fast climbs and aggressive maneuvering. Even when labeled interceptors, these aircraft still needed credible within-visual range handling because identification, geometry, and weapon limitations often collapsed fights into turning contests. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-21 became a WVR staple in this environment, a compact interceptor fighter whose performance made close-range engagements unavoidable as often as they were decisive. The Dassault Mirage III applied delta-wing energy fighting to real operational use, building a record that kept it firmly inside the dogfighter category despite its emphasis on speed. Sweden's Saab 35 Draken bridged fighter and interceptor roles with service-proven WVR capability, shaped by air defense requirements that demanded rapid reactions and tight maneuvering. Our Britain's English Electric Lightning was conceived as an interceptor, but a qualified WVR role persisted in training and operational expectations. At sea, the Vought F-8 Crusader remained a carrier-based gunfighter, preserving a WVR-focused lineage even as missiles entered the picture. The Vietnam-era air war exposed how quickly modern air combat could be pulled back into visual range. Identification rules often required pilots to close for confirmation. Early missile reliability and envelope limits narrowed opportunities, and dense, fast-moving engagements punished aircraft that could not maneuver well. The result was a renewed emphasis on training and the practical return of guns as a necessary part of the dogfighter toolkit. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II was built as a multi-role interceptor fighter, but its place here is qualified by the sheer volume of WVR combat it entered, forcing crews to adapt tactics and later configurations to close-range realities. The Vought F-8 Crusader, a carrier fighter by design, sustained WVR employment and retained the identity of a gun-centered dogfighter through repeated engagements. Opposing it, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17 became the maneuver fighter benchmark, using turning performance to set the terms of many close fights. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-21 brought a lightweight mix of missiles and WVR maneuvering, frequently shifting between brief intercept geometry and tighter engagements. The Northrop F-5A Freedom Fighter appears as a qualified inclusion through in-theater WVR roles, reflecting how light fighters could still matter when close combat remained unavoidable. As the Cold War widened, the dogfighter concept traveled well. Many air forces needed aircraft that were affordable to buy and fly, simple enough to sustain with limited infrastructure, and agile enough to survive the kinds of close-range encounters that training, geography, and rules often produced. The result was a global ecosystem of lightweight fighters and license-built lineages that carried credible WVR performance far beyond the major powers. The Northrop F-5 E-Tiger II embodied that export logic, pairing a lightweight fighter layout with modernized avionics while keeping WVR handling at the center of its utility. China's Shenyang J-6, a MiG-19 derivative, spread supersonic performance through a large user base and saw WVR-focused employment where simplicity and numbers mattered. The Chengdu J-7, derived from the MiG-21, became a late Cold War staple as a lightweight fighter that remained relevant in close combat even as weapons improved. The fallen Gnat and HAL Ajit represented the extreme end of the category, very light fighters built around close-in agility rather than complex systems. The IAI Kfir fits as a qualified inclusion, a Mirage-derived multi-role aircraft that, in specific air-to-air configurations, retained credible dogfighting potential within visual range. The 1970s marked a maneuverability renaissance shaped by Vietnam's lessons. Close-range fights still happened, and winning them depended on handling, cockpit usability, and training as much as on sensors. Designers pursued better high-angle performance and sustained turn capability, while improved short-range missiles and reformed air combat syllabi made WVR proficiency a deliberate requirement rather than an afterthought. The McDonnell Douglas F-15A arrived as an air superiority fighter with dogfight credibility built into its priorities, pairing power and visibility with a layout meant to support aggressive maneuvering. The General Dynamics F-16 A took the lightweight approach further, making high agility a central requirement and embedding pilot-centered ergonomics into the way it fought at visual range. On the opposing side, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23ML/MLD represents a qualified WVR inclusion, as later variants of the variable geometry fighter improved handling and close combat practicality compared to earlier models. The Dassault Mirage F-1, a fighter/interceptor blend, earned qualified WVR standing through repeated combat use where maneuvering engagements remained common. The Grumman F-14A Tomcat was designed for fleet defense, yet developed a qualified dogfight reputation and training role, reflecting how even long-range fighters had to be ready to turn hard when the geometry collapsed. By the 1980s, Western fighters treated within visual range performance as a system rather than a single trait. Relaxed stability and fly-by-wire control laws, better instantaneous turn performance, and cleaner cockpit sightlines were paired with missiles that increasingly matched the geometry of maneuvering combat. The dogfight did not disappear. It became more predictable, more trainable, and more consistently supported by the aircraft and its weapons. The General Dynamics F-16A and later block upgrades carried a multi-role brief but retained a core dogfighter lineage built around responsive handling and a strong WVR pedigree. The McDonnell Douglas F-A-18A brought that philosophy to the carrier deck, emphasizing high alpha control and institutional WVR training as part of routine naval fighter employment. France's Dassault Mirage 2000C sits as a qualified inclusion, an interceptor fighter shaped by modern sensors, yet still credible inside visual range where its handling and weapons integration remained relevant. The British Aerospace Sea Harrier FRS-1 is also qualified, a VSTOL fighter whose WVR combat record and maneuvering strengths established its place despite a specialized operating concept. The McDonnell Douglas F-15C refined the air superiority formula, remaining WVR credible even as its strengths increasingly extended beyond visual range. Late Cold War Soviet design closed the loop on the dogfighter idea by treating close-range agility as a first-order requirement again, not merely an accidental byproduct of speed. The emphasis shifted toward sustained maneuvering, high thrust-to-weight performance, and short-range missile integration that could exploit rapid pointing and tight geometry. In parallel with mature Western fourth-generation handling, this created a clear end-of-era benchmark for WVR combat design. The Mikoyan MiG-29 emerged as an air superiority fighter whose WVR agility and short-range missile integration made it a natural close-in specialist when engagements compressed. The Sukhoi Su-27 paired long-range reach with high-agility dogfight credibility, showing that size and endurance no longer had to exclude maneuver combat. The Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-21 bis appears as a qualified inclusion, a late-model lightweight fighter that retained relevance through refined performance and continued reliance on visual range tactics in many services. The Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-23 MLD is also qualified, a late refinement that improved WVR handling and survivability compared to earlier MiG-23 variants, keeping it competitive at the end of the Cold War's dogfighting arc.